If you ask most people who Mary Magdalene was, they might say, the prostitute who followed Jesus. But here's the truth. The Bible never says that. The woman in the Gospel of Luke who washed Jesus' feet with her hair was never named. Yet centuries later, Pope Gregory the Great, based on no real evidence, declared that the sinful woman, Mary of Bethany, and Mary Magdalene were one and the same. This confusion spread like wildfire through the church for centuries, painting Mary as a repentant sinner instead of a faithful disciple. It wasn't until 1969 that the Catholic Church officially corrected the record, admitting these were three different women. Far from being a fallen woman, Mary Magdalene was actually a figure of independence and faith. She came from Magdala, a prosperous fishing town on the Sea of Galilee. Unlike most women in the Gospels, she isn't described as someone's daughter, wife, or sister. She stands on her own. Some scholars even believe she had wealth and influence, and helped financially support Jesus' ministry. Modern historians now view her as a strong and important disciple, one whose reputation was diminished by men who feared her influence. Despite all the contradictions in the Gospels, there's one thing all four agree on: Mary Magdalene's importance. She's mentioned more times than most of the apostles. Mark and Luke tell us that Jesus healed her by casting out 7 demons. All 4 Gospels record her at the crucifixion, burial, and resurrection. In fact, in the Gospels of Mark and John, she's the first person to see the risen Christ. And she's the one who runs to tell the others, making her the first messenger of the resurrection. That's why early Christians called her Apostle to the Apostles. For a brief moment in time, Mary Magdalene was the church, the only human on earth who knew that Jesus had risen. Not every story of Jesus and his followers made it into the Bible. In 1896, a mysterious papyrus book was discovered in Cairo, the Gospel of Mary. It's not part of the official New Testament, but it gives a fascinating glimpse into how some early Christians saw her. In this text, after Jesus' death, the disciples are afraid to preach his message. It's Mary who stands up and says, "Do not be afraid. His presence will be with us." She reminds them of Jesus' teachings and even shares a private vision she received from him. But not everyone liked it. Peter, yes, the same Peter who would later be the first pope, questions her authority. How could Jesus choose to speak to a woman, he says. Yet the Gospel of Mary presents her as the disciple who truly understood Jesus' message when others doubted. Centuries later, the mystery around Mary only deepened. Some modern writers, like Dan Brown in the Da Vinci Code, suggested that Mary and Jesus were married and even had children. But despite the sensational headlines, historians and theologians agree there's no evidence to support it. The so-called Lost Gospel and the story of Joseph and Asenath are later texts that symbolically reinterpret older stories, not literal records of marriage. As for Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper, the figure beside Jesus is not Mary Magdalene, it's John the Apostle. Leonardo's soft, youthful style made the figure appear feminine, fueling centuries of confusion. Over the Middle Ages, countless legends grew around Mary. Some said she retreated into the wilderness, fasting and praying until her hair grew long enough to clothe her. Others claimed she fled persecution, miraculously landed in France, and spent her final days in a cave preaching the gospel. Her supposed relics were later discovered in 1279 and enshrined by King Charles II of France, though no one can say for sure whose bones they were. And yes, even Easter eggs are connected to her. An old Eastern legend says Mary brought eggs to Emperor Tiberius to proclaim Christ's resurrection. When he scoffed, the eggs turned bright red in her hands, the first symbol of the Easter miracle. For centuries, Mary Magdalene was misunderstood. But in 2016, Pope Francis officially elevated her July 22nd feast day to the same level as the male apostles, calling her a true and authentic evangelizer. At last, the Church restored her honor, recognizing her as not just a follower, but a leader, a witness, and a voice of courage. Her story reminds us that God's truth isn't confined by gender, title, or power. Sometimes, it's the humble and faithful who carry the greatest message. So, was Mary Magdalene's secret life fact or fiction? The truth is both simpler and more powerful than the myths. She wasn't a fallen sinner. She was a faithful disciple. She wasn't forgotten. She was the first witness. And she wasn't silent. She was the voice that proclaimed resurrection to the world. This is the gospel voice. Thanks for watching. And remember, sometimes the truth is holier than the legend.